Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Valli Parthasarathy from Synergy Veterinary Behavior. I am doing a little quick crash course on um, dom dominance, myths, and realities. What are some of the things that we know about them? What are some of the myths around them? So just really quick little toe dip into this. This is, of course, a very complicated type of topic and um, can take days and days to go over fully, but I just want to go ahead and touch the tip of the iceberg just a little bit today. Dominance is a really common term right now, and it's used a lot in the behavior realm. We do have a lot of people who use it when they are talking about interactions with their fellow people. They're talking about it in terms of their relationships with their pets or the relationship with the livestock that they're working with, or even in relation to the zoo animals that they're working with. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what dominance is and then talk a little bit about what it isn't. So dominance is an experiential relationship that's between two animals of the same social species. So I want to break that down a little bit. So generally speaking, a dominance relationship is experiential. So therefore, there has to be some sort of interaction with these two animals to be able to understand a relationship between the two. Like everything, there can be exceptions, but by and large, we're talking about something where the animals need to experience to be able to determine what is that relationship. Generally, this relationship is between two animals. So we don't say necessarily that one animal is dominant over everybody else. It might be that one animal has a more hierarchical, if there's a hierarchical relationship, maybe there's one animal that has a higher relationship than maybe all the other animals. But typically, we're talking about a relationship between two animals, and it's two animals generally of the same species. So when we look at this from the perspective of when we look at this from the perspective of behavioral ecology, we're talking about animals within the same species because it's quite common for animals of other species to hang out. For example, I'm sure you've seen videos of the alligators that are lying there and the birds that are on top of them, some of the symbiotic relationships where the birds are picking off their parasites, or you've probably seen the giant herds of um, ungulates out on the African plains and how we have zebras and wildebeest and all these animals together. But we don't see dominance relationships per se between like the zebra and the wildebeest. Generally, it's within the same species. And typically, when we're talking about a sort of a dominance hierarchy, to use that term, we're talking about um, a social species. There are some exceptions to this when we're talking about certain breeding situations, such as leks, where there are males that have display areas that they guard. And so these are oftentimes animals that are not particularly social. And so the males all gather, and then the females come and choose among the males that are there. But typically, when we're talking about a hierarchy, we're talking about a relationship within a social species. Generally, dominance is related to access to preferred resources, and what those preferred resources are going to depend on what the animal is. And it also depends on how clumped those resources are. So you may see more social agonistic or aggressive relationships if there are resources that are more clumped versus relationships where the resources are more spread out and the animals are not having to directly compete over them. Now, the thing which is, I think, one of the most misunderstood aspects of dominance, the dominance hierarchy concept, is that it ideally is there to minimize fighting. If we have a relationship that has been established and the animals understand what their relationship is socially, then that decreases conflict. And so that's an important piece to consider because, as we're saying, oftentimes this is related to access to preferred resources. Now, some species do have very strict hierarchies. And so chickens, for example, you may have heard the term pecking order. Chickens have a very strict hierarchy. And so generally you might have, chicken A is dominant to chicken B, who's dominant to chicken C. So therefore A is going to be dominant to C. It is oftentimes not that strict. So we may have triangles where animal A is maybe dominant to animal B, and animal B is dominant to animal C, but animal C is actually dominant to animal A. So um, you have a lot more complexity in hierarchies. And when it comes to most of our social species, I think that it's really important to keep in mind that this idea of dominance doesn't mean that just because you are a just because an animal maybe is higher up on the um, in the hierarchy, let's say, that doesn't mean that they automatically are going to fight for the resources that they want. They also, one of the roles of the one who is a little bit more, maybe more higher up in the hierarchy, might be to actually give up the things that they have to ones that are lower down in the hierarchy. So that's also an important thing to consider as well. Something that dominance is not. There are a lot of things dominance is not. So like I was saying before, the reason why animals will create a hierarchy based on this concept of dominance is that this helps to reduce aggressive behavior. So once an relationship is established, we are seeing a significant decrease of aggressive behavior. So generally speaking, if we're not going to see fights happening over and over again. Um, we also don't see that it's between species. So like I was saying, we don't have the wildebeest and the zebra fighting for dominance. Um, talking about wolves specifically, because this is one of the big areas where this idea of dominance comes in, is that with dominance relationships, the early research was turns out was not is not generalizable to the dog population or even the wolf population. So the early research with wolves actually looked at a group of non-related wolves that were put together in a situation that was novel, and there were a lot of fights that broke out. And that is very unlike the typical naturally occurring relationships that wolves have in the pack, where it's more of a family and there may be an alpha male and an alpha female, but you don't see fights happening all the time with these animals. Um, and it's actually what we find when we're working with dogs who are having aggressive behavior with each other, which is the other place that dominance comes in, because clients will ask me, well, how do I support that animal who is more dominant? And we tell them it's actually less important to support the dominant animal than it is to reinforce appropriate behaviors. So what we're seeing and what I want to talk about is a shift away from using dominance as a framework for why training works. So we see this quite frequently, and I have horses here because we see this a lot in horses as well. Um, so horses and dogs is the truly some of the biggest places we see it. I'll see it a little bit with cats. I'll see it to some extent with birds, but not as much as with dogs and horses. And so a lot of times with dogs and horses, there's this discussion of you have to be dominant to tell the horse who's boss, or you have to be dominant so that the horse respects you and listens to you. You have to be dominant so the dog doesn't show aggressive behavior towards you, because if the dog is showing aggressive behavior, that means it's trying to dominate you. That last statement about if the dog is showing aggressive behavior, he's trying to be dominant, makes no sense because dominance is there to decrease aggressive behavior. So if there is more aggressive behavior, that means that something else is going on. Plus, we're talking about two different species. We're talking about two different species, and from what we know, horses understand who horses are. Dogs understand who dogs are. They understand also that we are not horses. They understand that we are not dogs. So the relationships that we have with them are different than the relationships that they have with each other. So thinking about this in terms of dominance, it really doesn't make sense, because we are not trying to be dogs, and we're not trying to be horses. We are people, and we're trying to figure out how to live cooperatively with these animals who are letting us do so much to them. So what I want to focus on is how do we reinforce the behaviors that we want, and how do we help these animals succeed in the behaviors that we're looking for so that they can so that we can support them in what we want them to learn, rather than focusing on establishing dominance. Because really, when we're trying to when we have situations where people try to establish dominance, what often happens is that you're using some sort of force or some sort of compulsion to basically change an animal's behavior. And if you're doing that, you're not treating that animal with respect, and frankly, that animal is not necessarily going to, if there is such a thing with such as respect in an animal, you might get more fear than respect from that animal back. And so I think that's a very important thing to consider. Um, so when we're working with our patients, dominance is not at all part of what we talk about, and except to say these sorts of things, it's not how we approach training. It's the research has shown that this is not how training works most effectively. Um, and why stress our animals out by doing things to dominate them when really we could work with them in a much more friendly way, in a much more respectful way. So if you have any questions, or if you have any questions about your pet, if you are concerned about their pet, if you have questions about whether or not something like a dominance hierarchy may be going on, or if you're concerned about the relationship between the pets in the house, come and contact us. Synergy Veterinary Behavior, info@synergybehavior.com. Our phone number is 503-336-1202. We'll be happy to help you and your pets as well, and have you have the most um, help you have the most robust relationship that you can with your pet. Thank you so much, and we hope to hear from you.